So here we are. We're only people who are sharing their screen will appear on screen right now. So we're going to go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker, Paul, who's up here. And Rebecca, if you could help us out by, as people need to be admitted, if you could do that for me. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker. Our speaker today is Paul Curran. He was born in Maryhill, Glasgow, Scotland, and he played the clarinet as a youngster in the Glasgow School Orchestra, and saw his first opera at the Scottish Opera's production of Wozzeck. Now, how's that for getting your feet wet? Wozzeck in 1980. Later, he moved to London, where he trained as a ballet dancer at the London Studio Centre and the Central School of Ballet before studying with Sulamith Messerer. He worked for a time as an usher at ENO during the period when Lord Harewood and Elder and David Pountney formed the artistic management of the company and took it in new directions. Curran spent 2 years at the ballet school of the Finnish National Opera, and then 3 years as a professional dancer with the Scottish Ballet and in Germany. However, a hip injury terminated his ballet career, and Paul worked in the interim as an interpreter and stage manager before he got the opera bug in full. Let's see, I got someone coming in here. Before he got the opera bug, and at 27 entered the National Institute of Dramatic Art in Sydney, Australia, to study directing. Curran has gone on to a varied career all over the world, including Canadian Opera, La Fenice, La Scala, Lyric Opera of Chicago, Covent Garden, Mariinsky, Santa Fe, and the Wexford Festival, just to name a few. He is also a noted teacher and is currently teaching for the Los Angeles Opera Young Artists Program since 2012. He has also taught for the Young Artists Programs at Covent Garden, Yale University, Santa Fe Apprentice Program, the Academy of Vocal Arts, among others. And so I'd like to introduce you to our guest today, Paul Curran. Welcome, Paul.
Hi. Thank you, Terry. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Thank you. I actually was also teaching last year for the Adler program here.
Oh, I did not
realize
that.
I did 2 lots of it online. Yeah, which was very exciting. It was great to work with them. Again, it was frustrated. I live 2 blocks. It's a block and a block away from the Opera House. So it was terribly frustrating to be doing this when we should have been across the street working with them in person. But at this time last year, it wasn't possible. But I'm very glad to be here. I had a great time the last time I spoke to the Wagner Society. And it was my idea. Terry asked me to talk. And I thought, because it's this format, instead of, me pontificating on about one particular thing, actually the thing that happens when I give talks is I very often get many questions that we never get time to discuss. So I thought I would open it up to you guys and say, you can ask questions. So one of the things I would say right now is, whatever I'm talking about, or when somebody's asking a question, if you have something that you want to ask about, or you're just curious about, big or small, take a little note. And then when it comes to time, we don't have that embarrassing lull of nobody having questions at the end. So you can have that moment of saying, actually, I'd like to know, how do you go about this? How do you do that? Whatever. Yeah. No question is too dumb.
I think the only dumb question is the one that didn't get asked. And so and who knows where it would lead to from there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and kick it off because I did get one question, and then I had a brief chat with Paul earlier today, and so that made me think about some other things to ask him. And so save your questions to the end and write them down, and raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. And you can, we'll call on you, and you can just unmute yourself and ask the question. So first off, my question was, Paul, your ballet career was retired due to an injury. So what drove you to return to school and pursue a career as a director?
Very simply, I knew I couldn't bum along. I knew there was no, when you're a dancer, you train young. The dance injury was catastrophic in that this is my hip and this is my left leg. It came out, the leg came out of the hip socket. So it was definitely over. I managed to push it back in and continue with the show, but the career was ostensibly over. So I knew I needed training. I knew I wanted to continue something with the arts. I'd been working as a stage manager. I'd been working as an interpreter at the Edinburgh Festival, took English National Opera to then the Soviet Union in 1990. And I knew I needed retraining. So it was my partner at the time who said, because I was like, what am I going to do now? My partner at the time was an actor, said, well, you should be a director, because I used to help him with lines. And I was like, why a director? And I honestly thought I could never do that. That's way too complicated. And he said, well, you love the sound of your own voice. You're always bossing people around and you always think you get the right answer. I was like, okay, so I guess that's the list. Thank you. And he wasn't wrong. What I did was I then looked, I was living in London at that point, and we'd been living in Australia previously, and I looked for training because I knew I couldn't just do it. And the best course I could find was a 2-year course at the National Institute of Dramatic Arts in Sydney. You had to audition. 550 of us auditioned for 6 places as directors. So I was somewhat amazed that I got through that. And have remained amazed ever since. But the funny thing is, when I started it was just the best fit ever. I knew immediately this is what I need to do, and this is what. And I've been incredibly lucky to have kept doing it now for 30 years. I can't believe I graduated 30 years ago. Quite extraordinary. Yeah. So that was it. Just this is the right thing to do.
Yeah. You said you spoke a number of languages. How many do you speak now, Paul? It's a lot.
Including English, because I'm Scottish, and I think we need to include English as an official foreign language for Scottish people. I speak 9 languages.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, some better than others. Italian, Russian, Norwegian, pretty fluent. Others come and go if I'm not using them. But then, I'll be sitting in a plane or in an airport or train, and you hear somebody speak Finnish or something like that and Swedish, and then you understand it. So yeah, it's I always say it's like a hard drive. Often I can't find the file, but I know the file's there.
Yeah, that starts happening as we mature. Okay, the next question I had for you, this is one of mine. Ballet has obviously informed your stage direction. I was able to see the Lyric Opera of Chicago stunning production of Die Frau ohne Schatten, which you directed with sets and costumes by Kevin Knight, and it was extraordinary. I think Emma has a screen share she can do with us to show those. I could only find 2 photos from the production. It was spectacular, and for me, a joy to behold. So how did you approach such a fiendishly difficult opera? And there's one more of the principal female artists here, Deborah Voigt, Jill Grove, and Christine Brewer. And I was fortunate, and where I sat next to Christine Brewer's husband.
Oh, Ross, yeah.
Yeah. So how did you approach that?
How did I approach? Number 1, the question for me was, what's the cast and who's conducting? Because especially a piece as difficult and as complicated as Die Frau ohne Schatten is pointless in doing unless you have quite simply a world-class cast. And we had, the men were Bob Dean Smith and Franz Havlad. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it was a pretty world-class cast. I remember the first day, actually, when we did a music call and, people were starting to sing, and it was like watching a Borg McEnroe match, for those of us that remember Borg McEnroe, in that as one started singing, there was no negativity at all. But I remember, Jill Grove, Debbie starts singing, and then Jill Grove starts singing, and then you see the tenor kind of goes, oh. And then the next person starts singing, and the other one goes, oh. then Christine starts singing and everyone went, oh shit, great, right. So that's what we're going to do. And it was this amazing, supportive 5-person cast, essentially, of really, we can deliver one of the best vocal performances, because I thought it was a fantastic vocal performance. How do I approach it? With great trepidation. It's a very difficult piece. The first 2 acts are very similar. The third act, because it's in Kaikobad, is like a completely different opera. It's like he took a holiday and came back and said, hey, I've just done basically, I don't know, CSI in New York, and now I'm going to go to CSI Planet Zonk. It is so off the wall, the third act, and fantastic for that. Main thing was, what was our budget? Because it's a piece that demands great imagination and a lot of budget. And the bad news was, when we went to present the show, because you present about a year or so before, the management was changing and they had cut the budget. And they'd cut the budget by at least a third. So we had to go back and rethink. The basic elements of it were, we used a black Formica floor because it gives depth and disappears. It looks magical. We used a wall that was rounded but also falling on top of itself. And that wall is, to this day, still the biggest, single, heaviest and largest set element. It's the bit you can see at the back, set element that the lyric opera has ever had. That revealed, it flew out and it revealed this set. This set is the dyer's wife and Barak's home. So we based this on dyer's pots from Pakistan that there are pictures of. And what it was complicated, because what we did with this was, they all had to line up on the floor. There were traps underneath and people came out of the traps. It was not uncomplicated. The revolve, talk about making your life more difficult than you need to. The revolve didn't only go that way. There was another revolve in the middle that could go that way and the opposite. So in the third act, the prison for Barak and the wife was actually just the two of them on the revolves, moving in different directions with spots of light that they moved in and out of. So it was very much it was simple for that. It was the world of the imagination. It was not easy. It was especially when the budget was cut. The wall was originally a huge LED wall. That all disappeared. And then we had this. And that wall flew out, and the set you just saw came underneath it, and then another wall came in. The forest, for example, was a very abstract forest. It was neon lights, neon tube lights that came in at an angle. And the Kaiser flew in a white horse, oversized, enormous white horse that we painted with ultraviolet paint. So it really like blew up in your face. And I remember asking Bob Teen Smith, because all of a sudden, you know, you've got all these ideas, and then the practicality comes, and you're like, shit, he's got to get on that horse. He's got to be raised up about 20 meters, and he's got to sit there for about 15 minutes, and then they lower him in to sing. So I was like, how are you with heights and horses? And Robert Dean Smith said, oh, I grew up in a farm. I was good. I'll be fine with a horse. I was like, you know, it's not real. I mean, it's a fake horse. And he was great. So I had to land, he got off it. He was fantastic. That was the approach. The approach was the simple two-world thing, the magical world of Kaikobad entering into the human world, which if you look at in psychological terms is basically the idea of conscience. Do you have a conscience? Why does this woman not have a shadow? Why does she not have children? Why is she barren? What is it about? Is it a practicality or is it a mental thing? So in this production, it was very much the two worlds intermingling. Hope that answers it.
Oh, it really was magical, because it defied imagination. I mean, it really did look like he was flying on the horse, and it was just quite spectacular. I saw him sing it also in La Los Angeles, I think.
In the Hockney production, yeah.
Yes, in the Hockney, and he had a difficult landing in Los Angeles. Okay, so there's a story out there. This one is maybe from this is from Andy. There's a story, or perhaps an urban legend, about a certain director who sent word to the conductor that there was dissatisfaction with the tempi used in a particular production. From your side of the stage, has this been the case for you? And how do you approach differences in aesthetics? Or even the general director can, they're allowed to have opinions too. So how do you navigate the minefield?
Well, has it happened to me? Yes, every show.
Every show,
absolutely, of course.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in that instance, the reply from the conductor was, if there are any notes to be given on tempo, I'll only take them from the composer. Well, number one, 99.9% of the composers are dead. So yeah, good luck with that. Number two, what gave the conductor the absolute carte blanche to do whatever the hell they like with that piece? Where did I miss that? When Moses was doing the 10 Commandments, was that an 11th? Or was that an amendment slipped in? You can screw up any score the way you like and nobody will ask a question. No. The idea of doing a production, the reason they're operas is because they are theatrical events. So there are two big groups, or several big groups, that have skin in the game, have opinions on this. And that is certainly, and for me, first and foremost, the music, and then in tandem with that, the physical production, the look, the storytelling. But I've never had really problems with, I had one problem with one conductor on a job, which I'll come to in a second. But basically, I suppose because I trained as a musician, I seem to be able to talk to them in, let's say, their own language. It helps if the conductor really knows what they're doing. And they don't always, I'm afraid. The same as not all directors show up knowing what they're doing. I mean, it's remarkable to me that when I was running a theatre and I saw some directors showing up and they didn't really know the story and they were reading from a CD booklet. And I was like, where's the score? What are you doing? It's not just words, it's a lot more than that. So yeah, how do I approach it? Always, I show up in the first days, always to the music call, always. And I will have discussions about tempi, about rubato, about cuts, about various things with the conductor and the cast. Remember, it doesn't matter what your opinion of how fast the Ride of the Valkyries goes or the Ruf in Götterdämmerung. Makes no difference what your opinion is if the poor bugger that's singing it can't sing it. If they can't get a breath, why are you taking it at that tempo? It's a collaboration. So the whole point is you need to talk to people. And sometimes you need to push them and say, look, I think you can do it like this, come on. Because a lot of people will be conservative out of fear. But the idea of inflicting something on somebody just because it's your idea or you think it's right, to me is a nonsense. And there's been a few clashes over the year now. I remember in a Peter Grimes, the very young conductor, I did it once, had the chorus, now is gossip put on trial in the second act. It begins with Hobson with the drum, now is gossip put, and the tempo was, now is gossip put on trial. And I was like, what the hell?
No.
What? I was like, it's not a square dance. And he said, oh, but, and I remember this kid saying to me, oh, but he was doing Grimes for the first time. Yeah, but it's just fluff. And I was like, no, it's the Salvation Army. It's Christian fundamentalism. It's religious fundamentalism. It's sinister. It's the beginnings of the lynch mob. That's what it's about. You don't screw with us. He didn't get it. He just didn't get it. In that instance, interestingly, I insisted, but then it was the chorus that turned on him and said, we're not doing that at that tempo.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they were like, it's nonsense, makes no difference. So that's an example of a couple of conductors I've worked with who have done things, tempi changes, etc., for what I would call perverse reasons, exactly the same way as many directors will do effects on stage or things for perverse reasons, to make a point or to just be different. I remember one person on a Traviata saying to me, well, nobody's ever conducted it like at this tempo, so I'm going to do it. And I was like, great. How is that helping anybody? How is this actually working? Other than just your personal jerk off, basically. That's not real. So it's always a discussion. And I have to say I've had a few, not run-ins at all, but I've had a few very fantastic discussions with conductors who have convinced me of things, and that I've said to conductors, let's try it like this. A prime example, I did a musical once, a Kurt Weill musical called The Firebrand of Florence, based on Benvenuto Cellini. It was a Broadway disaster in 1945. And I did it with the BBC Symphony Orchestra and Sir Andrew Davis. And Andrew, at one point, he came out and he let the leader or the assistant conduct it. And he said, this is just not working. What the hell is wrong with this? And I said, well, Andrew, could you dance to this? He said, what? And I said, it's a dance. Could you, I mean, the tempo, could you successfully move to this? It was very slow. And he was like, no, it's heavy. And I said, well, that's the problem with it, isn't it? And love Andrew, and also it was too heavy, it was too thick. So he ended up, it was a good collaboration in that he ended up saying, within the violins and the cello, etc., you stop playing to let the sound be less thick, to be more light. So it was an easier thing to play, and it then got that dance element right back. So I've had remarkably few problems with conductors. One spectacular, horrific experience, which was on Tristan, where the conductor didn't know the score, just didn't know it well enough. And that was very hard. That was extremely difficult. You can't show up not knowing the score. You just can't. Whether you're the director, the singer, or the conductor, it makes no difference to me. But yeah, in the instance of I don't like the tempo you're taking, that sometimes in a production, for example, Die Fallene Schatten. Die Fallene Schatten had a wall that flew out and a revolve that came around with that huge set you just saw in it that had to land in a very specific place. That tempo has to be agreed. There's no margin for, oh, I'm feeling it different tonight. Why? Because there's an awful lot of people on stage whose lives are at stake if this wall gets brought down on their heads. That's a practical reason for it. So yeah, as I said, I'll take notes from the composer. Great. Very convenient when they're dead.
There are some living ones, though.
Yes, and I've done several world premieres, and I have to say the composers have been fantastic to collaborate with. And I'll tell you why. They're always interested, in my experience, in their own work being, they have a very strong opinion of it, but their own work being reinterpreted and what else you might bring to it. They don't always agree with it, but they want to see where else it might go.
Yeah, that's a really good point there. Okay, well, the next one question is, you've directed a couple of my bucket list operas, a fabulous Albert Herring in Santa Fe that was just terrific. And I saw it. And also Schwanda der Dudelsackpfeifer, which, I mean, people go, what? By Jaromir Weinberger. I mean, it's a household name. Which I actually saw it in a very tiny opera house in Gießen, but you presented it, and there's a really interesting story about that, which I'd like to hear. And then, do you have a bucket list opera?
Right. Yes, I do have a bucket list opera, and I've not done it yet. Obviously, it's a bucket list opera. But the Schwanda was, there was a new intendant in Augsburg, just outside Munich, which is a theatre, by the way, that is enormous. The stage is enormous. The intendant was having discussions with a singer from Augsburg, and he came up with a piece that he looked at, loved, and he thought would be a great piece for him. And it was the baritone Johannes Martin Krenzler. So Johannes decided that he wants to do Schwanda the Bagpiper, and that's how I got involved. So we did this production in this enormous opera house on the tiniest budget I've ever had, 19,000 euros, 19, not 90, 19. I used the stage machinery because there were lifts that went up and down. I turned it into a film studio kind of thing. And it was a wonderful experience. It was a really fantastic experience. The bucket list piece for me is Parsifal.
Oh,
I've never been offered it. I was discussing it once, but it was the wrong circumstances in that it was for a theatre that was in quite some chaos. They didn't have time, I felt, to rehearse the orchestra properly, and there would be no reason for me to do it if it wasn't going to be played and performed at a world-class level. So, and also the cast was just too young. It was, I mean, I'm all for young people obviously having experiences, but I'm sorry, you can't be singing Parsifal at 25 or 24. It's ludicrous. So that was a difficulty, but that's my bucket list is Parsifal. I mean, I'm very lucky through my career. I've ticked off a lot of stuff that I'd always thought, oh, I'd like to do that. But I've never been the sort of director. I remember an agent I had once saying to me, just called me out of the blue and said, what's your concept for Macbeth? And I was like, my concept for Macbeth is a contract and a check. What? And he's like, what do you mean? And I said, I don't have a concept for bloody Macbeth. But I don't know. I mean, what theatres are in? Who's singing Macbeth? Who's conducting? When is it? What's on either side of it in the repertoire? What else am I doing that year? Why would I be interested? No, I don't have I'm not the type that says, oh, I have the answer to staging everything. I have colleagues who do. That's not me. In fact, a lot of shows I've turned down because I felt it was the wrong piece at the wrong time or just the wrong piece. Good example, Don Giovanni. I turned down Don Giovanni 11 times.
Oh, goodness. Emma put her hand up.
Yes.
I'm on your website, Paul, and I can show some stills from Schwanda if you wish.
Absolutely, yeah, go for it.
Okay, yeah. Go for it.
You can go ahead and put those up because...
and I'll try and explain
explain what Schwanda is about.
So Schwanda is a story of a man who is, they live in the country, him and his wife, they swear that they'll never be unfaithful to each other. Basically, the devil comes in, tempts Schwanda, and takes him through like a time warp thing to the realm of the Ice Queen. And there she tempts him. It's like a kind of a Tannhäuser story. This is the devil in this. And they go down into the realm of the Ice Queen. Of course, the Ice Queen tries to seduces him, succeeds in seducing him. And at that point, kisses him having sworn to his wife, this is him with his wife and the devil, sworn to the wife that he'd never kiss another woman. And immediately he goes through another thing and he ends up in hell. So when he gets to hell, as he's in hell, this is the realm of the Ice Queen. And we made it that the Ice Queen was an actress trying to seduce him who was making a movie. And we even made a black and white movie for this. And when he's in hell, he meets the devil in hell, and the devil says, let's play cards. Nobody here wants to play cards with me. And Schwanda's like, well, because obviously you cheat all the time. And he says, of course I cheat, I'm the devil. The Ice Queen tries to put him to death. So I did a sort of pit in the pendulum thing with this enormous pendulum. You see the size of it, swinging, that's just about to kill him and cut him in half, and then he's saved. But he goes, of course, everything comes well in the end, and he ends up back with his wife. This was it's called the Besenballet, the broom ballet. Don't ask me why a composer said there's going to be a broom ballet. So I turned it into a Busby Berkeley number with everybody with brooms. Lemons, lemonade. This is hell. How do you do hell on stage? So what I did was I filled hell with everybody I thought should be in hell.
Oh, goodness.
Hitler was in there, Cleopatra was in there, Marilyn Monroe was in there. All these horrible people were in hell.
And Marilyn Monroe?
Yes. Yeah. I thought she did a great disservice to women.
Okay.
So hell, Ku Klux Klan were in there. All sorts of people were in there. And it was hilarious with the chorus, working with them, you know, with their...
Where's Margaret Thatcher?
She is in there. She's there. There's also a lady, she was the last lady in England called Myra Hindley. She was a child murderer. And what you're seeing behind is the black and white movie that we made in the first act.
Oh God. So this is better than the one I saw.
Yeah, this was hilarious, actually. It was great fun doing it. And then when we come back to Earth, they come back, and the set that you had seen previously, which was a sepia black and white set, all of a sudden sprang into color, and they were listening to the radio, and the whole thing was a kind of a dream. Yeah, it's a beautiful piece. It's a really beautiful piece.
It is.
If you can listen to it, there is some fantastic music in Schwanda.
Right.
Schwanda the bagpiper, or Schwanda Dudelsackpfeife in German, or Schwanda Dudak in Czech. Great.
Yeah. Yeah, didn't they do it in Wexford? They might have.
Damiano Micheletto did it, but it was supposed to be me, and because of a mix-up, Damiano ended up with the records. Tells you how long ago it was.
Oh goodness!
He ended up with the records, and he did it, and I did another piece by Förster called Eva, which was the first musical version of what became Jennifer.
Okay.
It was kind of like Tchaikovsky and Dvorak had really bad sex and produced a baby, and that was it.
My goodness. Okay. So we know it's on your bucket list, and that's would be Parsifal. And as a segue, when I was seeing Schwanda Dudak in Gießen, Johannes Martin Kranzler was in the audience, and so I saw him. He's got a smile that lights up the whole town. And so I went and talked to him, and he's just an absolutely delightful person. So this is my last question, and everybody can start formulating your questions if you have any. You've been teaching during these COVID times, and actually last year you were here teaching with the Adler program, I believe. Yeah. You told me that. And do you foresee a change in theater direction with the millennials, a group who have been immersed since birth with the immediacy of the internet?
Well, I mean, Terry, we're showing our age because there's more than the millennials. There's the next crowd who are even younger. Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, there's always, it makes me feel like I'm an old fart because the methods I was brought up with are not those of today. I mean, we have to advance with technology. I feel one of the difficulties these days is in certain ways a reliance on technology, because one of the worst things that happens through the internet as a teacher is kids going online and either constantly comparing themselves to everybody else because it's there. You can see XYZ person in XYZ performance, or you can see them in competitions. Just the simple thing of getting likes. Everybody wants to be liked. How many likes did my post get? And it has a rather pervasive effect on people in that they start to doubt too much themselves rather than just going for it. What I've noticed it creates is a real fear of failure, and a real fear of allowing failure to be a teaching method. I mean, how many of us here have had total screw ups and you're like, but I'll never do that again. Or I've learned from it, or possibly I haven't learned from that, but it's a teaching thing. This younger generation, very young generation these days, for them, that failure is actually incredibly public if you're broadcasting this to the world. And that's difficult. We never had that, thank God. when I was a teenager, there were no cameras around to show my shenanigans because there were plenty of them. But these days, these kids have this everywhere. It's unhealthy in that I think it creates a mind that is constantly and negatively endowed. Criticism is very good because it can be constructive. When it's negative and comparative only, it tends to be destructive. I can't do that because soprano Z did that, so I can't do it like her, I'm not going to do it. That's not good. That's not very good. So half of my time is spent with singing, especially, is spent with trying to get the mind in the right place rather than, you know, what's this doing? This is not what singing is about. Singing's not here. Singing is the whole instrument. It's the whole, the same as acting, the whole instrument, the whole person. And that's what a lot of the training is. Sadly, for me, too many music conservatories do not have anywhere near adequate training for opera singers as actors. There's this, I had a discussion, let's say, it was a big argument, with one person at an institution who were being brought into the show I was doing, who said, the kids had asked me to come in and teach some classes, and this person said, oh no, you'll learn nothing from about acting from a class. You only learn in rehearsal. And I said, well, that's not true. I mean, apart from that, I'm not here as a teacher in rehearsal. I'm here to rehearse people that bring skills to me. I'm not here to teach them acting skills. That's not the thing. I don't have the time. No, you learn nothing in a class. And I said, no, I'm sorry. I think that's bullshit. Of course you learn in a class. And he said, well, who do you know that's learned about acting in a class? And I was like, I went to school with Kate Blanchett. She kind of learned in a class. You know, we were all there doing acting, you know, kind of worked. And this person would not have it, would not listen to anything. I've been teaching a long time, and yes, you really, really, really can learn in a class, but it's allowing them to lose that fear of constantly feeling they need to be performing. The minute you have a camera on somebody, they're performing. I'm performing right now. You're performing. You're not your usual self. There is just something that is not relaxed. There is something that is not exactly that open, passive thing that allows a teaching experience to really change you and affect you. So it's difficult. A major difficulty is discipline. Very different discipline today, because you're talking to somebody and you're saying, and I won't put up with it. I just say, no, if you're going to do that, as British Airways says, leave by any available exit. Yeah. You're going to call, why waste my time? I've schlepped across the world to teach a class, but you're on your phone. No, that's just rude, bad manners. And also in the business, you can't do that in rehearsal either. So yeah, there is a difference in this generation, and teaching them is a challenge. And I wish there were more people that had the skills to teach them better skills.
That's a really good point. So at this point in time, we're going to go ahead and open up the Q&A, unless you had anything further, jewels of wisdom for us, Paul.
Jewels of wisdom.
I did want to say something. Paul treated us, and you can also see it on his website too. Paul treated us to one of his little obsessions during COVID, is that he's been painting. He's been doing some art there in his little studio 2 blocks away from the Opera House, and he showed us a couple of his pieces. So maybe we can coax him to do that toward the end of our.
Absolutely. I'll just tell you, ladies and gents, I had not picked up a brush since 1970, when my teacher at elementary school said of an art project we did, oh, it's very messy, Mr. Curran. And in a 6-year-old way, I remember thinking, well, screw you, lady, I'll never do this again if you do it messy.
Yeah,
and I never did. And I was convinced I couldn't draw a stick figure. And I was forced last year on a course to do something. So I did. I threw something together. I will admit I was scared because I was scared of failure. But I was like, oh, come on, just do it. And I'll show you now what it is. I did a piece. Which was that?
And it's really quite lovely. I mean, I couldn't do it. I mean, I can barely paint my fingernails.
So it led to, from then, I then started, oh, maybe I can do this. So then I started to buy some paints and I started to paint. So I've been painting ever since. And I'll show you later some of my paintings.
Okay. Because the big boat rules, Emma Popek has a question. So I'll recognize her first. Emma is on the board of directors of the Wagner Society of Northern California. She's just really great. She is my excellent webinar producer and compatriot and partner in crime. So Emma, what's your question?
I have 3 questions of varying difficulty. I'll start with the hard question, if I may. What is your concept of Parsifal? People view it as mystical, Christian, anti-Christian, a-religious. What is your general view?
It's human.
It's human.
It's a human psychology, isn't it? It's about how the human being deals with the mystery of life and what ideas a human being comes up with and what ceremonies, rites, rituals that give us some form of answer as to why there is pain in our lives and why pain is important. So that's how I would approach it. Is it Christian? Is it Judeo? Is it Islamic? Is it any of those? Yes, all of them. It's part of all of that. What I don't feel it is, and I don't feel Wagner ever wrote anything like this, is it's not domestic. Even a piece like Vliegende Hollander is not, it seems a domestic piece, but it's on a much higher level. And just the level of the music, like Zenta and Dutchman's Duet, takes it to another realm. So I think like a movie score, maybe the first movie composer was Wagner, for sure. Like a movie score, there's an emotional life to Parsifal and the Wagner operas that lifts it beyond the mere simplicity of a story. So that's what I would say is the first one. Number two. Please tell us about your experiences in Yekaterinburg, Russia, and what was the name of this forward-looking artistic director there? I did Vliegende Hollander in Ekaterinburg, Littlesche Galant, jetzt it's called in Russian. And the director there, now his name's escaped me. Oh, is it he has a Greek name? Huh? Oh, it'll come to me. But okay. He's very forward-looking for a Russian company. Russia is, as we know, extremely right-looking. Even in Novosibirsk, when they did a Tannhäuser that had Jesus in it, the production was banned. The production was not allowed to go on because they wouldn't allow any religious iconography to go on stage, which seemed ridiculous since they do Boris and Khalanchina the whole time. I found Yekaterinburg fascinating to be in and to work in. Number one, I realized as I was flying in that it's the furthest away from salt water I'd ever been. I mean, you literally, if you get abandoned there, it's a long walk to a shore. Number two, it's one of them, strangely, because of Yeltsin, it's one of the most liberal places in Russia. So it's always been a little more open-minded. And the first piece they offered me there was actually Boris Godunov. And I said no, because I'd done Boris Godunov once. I did it with Mariinsky and Gergiev. And I didn't want to redo Boris in the city where they murdered the Tsar and his family. And just as a foreigner, I didn't think that was a smart idea. So another director did it, Alexander Titov, and did a wonderful production of it. I managed to see. I loved Yekaterinburg and would happily go back. Number three. What dancing parts did you do? Dancing parts. I didn't dance for very long because I got injured. I did a zillion performances of the Russian dance, the Nutcracker. I did the pas de trois in Swan Lake. I even did the Prince in Nutcracker. I did the Nutcracker in Nutcracker, the Rites of Spring, Petrushka, lots of even Martha Graham ballets. What was it called? Diversion of Angels, bits of cabaret, lots of stuff. So lots of different things.
One more question, may I? Terry, may I ask another one?
Sure, go ahead. You're the producer.
Unrelated. Paul, what do you think of Mark Morris? Do you like him and his work?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen anything of Mark's for some years, but back in the day, when you're in the 90s and stuff, when he was doing stuff, I thought it was absolutely fantastic. He had a real theatricality. He used dance in a dramatic sense rather than a decorative sense. So that really buzzed with me. I loved his work. Yeah.
Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And I just find this endlessly interesting. Paul, how many languages do you speak?
9.
9. Okay, so take that, slackers. It's like barely can manage English. Okay, so we have a question from Paul Dachschwager. You want to unmute and ask your question, Paul?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's see. I guess I had a couple of questions. One, I noticed there was a period of time where the balancing dancer was pretty much phased out, like at San Francisco, and I did not consider that to be a good development. And I was wondering, have you heard anyone in the ballet world? Have you heard anything in the ballet world that would lead you to believe that maybe the tide is turning and we're reconsidering, certain circles are reconsidering the balancing dancer? So I have one more. So
okay. So I don't know. I mean, I don't have much to do with the ballet world these days because, I'm like 40 pounds heavier, 50 pounds heavier than I was when I was a dancer. So I remember doing an interview with a journalist, and they said, what did you do first in career? I said, I was a dancer. And this interviewer went, right. I was like, yeah, thanks. The Balanchine thing, there was a backlash against it because, of course, all these stories came out of basically what you would call abuse by Balanchine. He was a very strict ballet master with the women. He wasn't vastly interested in the men because he said famously, dance as women.
Right.
And also when stories come out of Balanchine saying, you dance, I think. Of course, today, especially for young women, that's just not a healthy way of thinking. So I think that's where that backlash came from. The aesthetic that is Balanchine, I think, has never disappeared. And it's informed modern neoclassical dance, I would say, throughout the world. So you can't have choreographers like William Forsythe without the idea of it being channeled through Balanchine's aesthetic and Balanchine's sheer invention. Remember where Balanchine came from. Balanchine's a Cecchetti-trained dancer from St. Petersburg. His first big pieces were actually in what was called choreografici miniature, choreographic miniatures that they did. And this was revolutionary back in the day, in the 20s. This was this revolutionary idea of doing these small little pieces. So I don't think that's ever gone away, and I don't think it ever will. The idea of, my objection as a dancer to companies that drove me crazy was, number one, we were referred to as boys and girls. I was in my 20s. Number two, I was told, stop thinking, just do it. And that just wasn't me.
Well, did you dance under Balanchine at a city ballet?
I never did a Balanchine ballet. No, my shape was not for a Balanchine ballet. Balanchine was very specific body shape, and that was certainly not me.
Okay. And then
one of my favorite pieces in the entire repertoire of dance are Symphony in C and Serenade. Yeah. I think they are both works of extraordinary genius. To me, they're like living sculptures.
I know.
They absolutely come to life. I'm not a big fan, for example, of Frederick Ashton. People in my country think he's amazing. I find him extremely unmusical. Not my thing. But Balanchine, especially those two pieces, I love. So hope that answers the question.
My next question is pertains more to design. I've been seeing these new animated films like the Disney, and kind of a concern I had regarding design is that, you know, in the classical aesthetic, like it was well described by Heinrich Wölfflin in his book Classic Art. What he says is you want the design elements to really accentuate and to push forward and to extend slightly the human figure, right? And so therefore he prefers Raphael and Michelangelo to the middle Renaissance, which has too much stuff in it, too much busyness, rabbits and trees and flowers, right? And Michelangelo and Raphael, all that is pared away, and you just get the figure. Yeah. So what I've been thinking is that I think we're going back too far. We're moving too far away from, you know, with the animation. People love the potential of the animation, and I think that the figure is being totally swamped in really unidiomatic and unflattering ways by all this stuff, you know. And we're losing a sense of the integrity of the individual, you know, people being together and doing things. I don't know. I mean, is there? I mean, have you read Wölfflin's Classic Art? Do you have some sense on that?
Yes, but I think one of the main points is that all art comes in waves. The same as politics comes in waves. Something will be all the rage for a minute and then it'll die off. Sometimes it will come back, sometimes it won't. But it always comes with society changing its views on various things. And I think that will change because it has changed. It always changes. You know, Wagner, people saying, oh, Wagner changed the orchestra. Well, actually, Berlioz changed the orchestra more than Wagner, probably, because Berlioz was experimenting more. Did people like what Berlioz was doing? No, they hated it. They complained and bitched all the time. But can you imagine a symphony orchestra today without the influence of Berlioz? Impossible. Therefore, got to break a few eggs to make an omelet, right? So I think with that movement, you're right, but it's observational to me in that it'll come, it'll go, it'll come back again, but it always, I think, undulates.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And if you could mute yourself now, Paul, I'm going to call on Kirk Davis. Could you go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question? Welcome, Kirk. You need to unmute yourself. There you go.
There we go. The host would like me to unmute. Well, that's not a problem. First of all, Mr. Curran, thank you so much for appearing here with us. What a delight. I'm interested in the Ring. I've got a lot of productions and a lot of that, but I note that the Ring doesn't seem to have much dance opportunities in it. Is it less interesting to you because of that, or would you still be willing to accept the challenge of the Ring?
I mean, let me just clarify one thing. I trained as a dancer and grew up as a dancer and danced. I have had next to nothing to do with the dance world since my 20s because I trained at drama school. So I trained in classical drama, in Ibsen, Shakespeare, Chekhov, Tennessee Williams, etc. So the dance world, Terry is right in that, you know, there is certainly a dance element in some of what I do, but what I would describe it as is not a dance element, it's a body language element. What the dance world taught me was really two huge things. And that is, first of all, not to be afraid of large groups and use large groups as groups of individuals and then pull them together when you need them. So it's about the body language of what the body is saying. If we're having this discussion right now and I'm in this position, if I were to do the whole thing like this, I'm sure you'd all be saying what's he doing? What's going on over there? What is he being rude? Is he just not in the right chair? What's going on? So this body language is telling us a very different story from this body language. That's what I think the dance world gave me. In opera, you deal with big choruses, and I love a big chorus. I adore a big chorus. And a lot of directors are terrified of choruses because they see them as a mass. I see them as, if it's an Italian chorus, 80 very loud opinions that need to be dealt with. And I love that. So that was what the dance world brought to me. The ring, I mean, what's the dance element in the ring? I don't
Not
think
much.
there is a dance element.
The Rhine Maidens, maybe.
The Rhine
It's
Maidens,
body
maybe.
language rather than dancing.
But the real question is, are you interested in the ring? Are you fascinated or attracted or
I've
repulsed?
always been fascinated by the ring. Always, always, always. And I've directed one of the operas. I did a semi-staging for the Proms with Donald Runnicles conducting of Gutta Demo with Christine Brewer, in fact. In, God, when was it? I can't remember. It was at the Albert Hall. And, you know, people say, oh, a semi-staging. Believe me, there's nothing semi about staging any of the ring. In fact, semi-staging sometimes are more difficult because you need to get to the essence of something very quickly. You can't say to yourself, oh, don't worry about that. There'll be a big lighting effect or this element will fly in. You're like, no, shit, I've got to do this myself. I've got to make this work. So yes, absolutely, the ring is something that I've always been interested in. I very much doubt I'll get offered it. But, you know, you live in hope. But I'm always enormously enthusiastic to see other people's ring cycles, to see what their opinion of it is. It fascinates me. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite version of ones you've seen?
A favorite version of the ring? Probably the one that I saw in Bayreuth in the 90s. That was, who was it?
Was that the Daniel Barenboim ring?
No, Levine conducted it, and I can't remember who directed
It wasn't the Rosalie ring, was it?
Rosalie designed.
Okay, there you
Yes.
go.
Yes.
Were
I mean,
all
I
costumes
found
and
whatever that
everything-
thing was on Fricka's shoulder bizarre. She had like a whole model of Manhattan it looked like on her shoulder, whatever. I don't know what that was about. But I thought the aesthetic of the rest of it was beautiful. I really loved it. Yeah, but is there going to be a perfect ring? Nope, never.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. You can mute yourself, Kirk. Thank you very much for your comments. Does anybody else have a question?
Jose.
Nothing from Catherine Sire? Catherine, you should gotta ask question.
We have Jose and John Chilcott have their hands up.
Oh, I didn't see their hands up. Okay. Go ahead and I don't see them on the screen. So
If
go
you
ahead
go to
and
the grid view, they always appear at the top. I know that.
okay. Oh, there they are. Brad Wade has a question. Let's let Brad ask a question. And then John coming in from Hawaii, let's let John ask next. So Brad, take it away.
I was just wondering whether you had any on-stage operatic disasters that you'd be willing to talk about.
Personal disasters or stuff that's just gone wrong in shows?
Stuff that went wrong on stage in one of your productions.
Oh yeah, Frau in the Schatten. The whole last act of Die Frau in the Schatten was, so there's the Hütte der Schwere, there's all of those things, these magical elements are all supposed to come on. And because of this revolve, we opened up 2 doors in the set, and the revolved around. At one point, there was this enormous hand, a white hand that looked as if it came out of black oil, and it had the singer in it, and it delivered her. And then this waterfall, which was actually glitter and light, came down. And when the water turns to blood, we changed the light and we changed the glitter to red. That was one element. Another element was when the nurse and the empress are going to Kaikobad, they went in a boat. And for me, it was an upturned umbrella with all these lights in it. Except at the dress rehearsal, the whole thing broke down. Everything broke down. Nothing moved. The revolve didn't move. Not a door didn't open. Basically, there was Debbie Voigt and Jill Grove trying to bang in doors and get around to sing the scene. So yeah, there's been more than the one, but that's the one that comes to mind first.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you, Brad. Okay, Jose, could you unmute yourself and ask your question? And Jose is
Sure.
coming to us from Mexico.
Hi, Jose.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for the wonderful talk. I just have some questions regarding, I read a book in which some memories from Mademoiselle Boulanger were written. And she was mentioning the importance of getting to meet the masterpieces from composers that are not really known today, but that they were the point of starting to create a tradition in which the great masters could compose their masterworks. So she was mentioning that the people who studied with her, she obliged them to study these kind of minor works, let us say that. But I would like to hear from you, what do you think about those, and how would you approach those in a concert? Because nowadays we have only masterworks from very, very known composers, and it is very rare to have some other composers that are not known in a program, in a concert. So how do you approach this, and what are thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, the start of this is that they're rare in North America, because most companies will not be playing an opera by Vinci or by Weinberger or something like that, because they'll be afraid of ticket sales, etc. You can do them in a festival setting, or maybe an orchestra can say, we're going to do a concert of, for example, what I think is a glorious piece is Humperdinck's Die Königskinder. It's a fantastic piece, very Wagnerian in its output. So that's a piece nobody knows, but that influenced a lot of other things that came after it. See as much as you can. Remember, there are certain pieces that were in the repertoire that were enormously popular at one point. Die Königskinder with Geraldine Farrar was a regular at the Metropolitan Opera and Chicago and everywhere else for decades, and then it disappeared. The Golden Cockerel, a piece I've done by Rimsky-Korsakov, was, as Le Coq d'Or, was an enormously popular opera that disappeared, and nobody, we did it in Santa Fe and in Dallas a couple of years ago, and I think people saw it for the brilliant piece of political theatre that it actually is. So yeah, I mean, if you get the chance to hear or see anything, plus these days you have YouTube and the entirety of the internet to dig up anything and everything. There are pieces, by the way. It depends on the intendant, the artistic director, whoever is running various companies, what their taste is. Because if they don't know these composers or these pieces, then you're not going to see them because they're not going to program them. So it's always worth, to me, writing to them saying, hey, what about this? What about that? You never know when somebody says, that's a good idea. Good example, the opposite way, is when he was running the Paris Opera, Gérard Mortier declared Puccini would never be done in the Paris Opera because Puccini, and I quote him, is a third-rate composer. What do you say? I mean, you can agree, disagree, whatever, but to make a declaration like that seems very bold to me. But that's what Gérard was all about. Gérard was all about Gérard. So if that was that, then you'd never hear Fanciulla or Manolesco, or let alone Bohème and Tosca. So it's the people that are running the institutions that are making the decisions as to what's going on. Write to them, make a suggestion. That's fine.
Okay,
so do you have anything further, Jose? I will call on John Chilcott, coming to us from Hawaii. Hi, John.
Hi, John.
Hi. Hello. I've been watching theater performances for the Met on TV, when they go to the theater or movie theaters. I've noticed that there's been a change from the older productions, that the newer productions are more focused on television, and that I wonder if they're starting to sacrifice the live audience for a TV audience. And with the advent of the internet now, there will be more emphasis on such a broad audience that they'll change the way they perform these operas so that the technology will become more and more evasive at the cost of what the live audience to see. Do you see that trend, or is there anything to worry about?
Is there anything to worry about? No. I mean, people complained when operas were first being recorded, for example, back in the day. People complained when they were being filmed. Personally, I'd love to see what I mean, there's little bits of film you can see, but I'd love to see something like that. Take the Metropolitan Opera, for example. Peter Gell put in a system at the Metropolitan Opera of cameras where you have because that's his background, you have multi-cameras everywhere. You have the one that goes along the front, you have a lot of in-your-face cameras to enhance the quality of what you're seeing. And you can agree or disagree with that. A lot of people find it fantastic. For me, it's fantastic if it's balanced with the right sound quality. There's no point in having, everybody sounding a homogeneous sound, everybody sounds the same. Also, I feel sometimes in certain moments, in opera or in a play, when the camera can do a disservice because it's just too close. Nobody wants to, we're not dentists, nobody wants to see down a throat. I'm not interested in your fillings. Really? How often do you want to see that? How often in a movie do you see that? But you will get that because of the extended nature of what singing is and how, if the camera is too close, what it can do. On the other hand, the camera can also, because the camera is editing what you're seeing, the camera can improve what can be a dull performance for the audience, can be a far, and there is one I'm thinking of, but I'm not going to mention names, but there is the possibility that the camera can actually make the action seem less static and more interesting because the camera is picking up different angles and different shots, whereas the theatre performance is often the person is stood still or frozen. So I think there's pluses and minuses. What's pretty sure is that the recording industry, as used to be, going into a studio recording something is pretty much dead because nearly everything now is about filming. And there's something I wish, for example, I wish they'd filmed our Golden Cockerel at Santa Fe, but they didn't because they didn't. And then the Monet did it in Laurent Pelly's production. So that's now the main one that's out there of recent productions, which I thought was a great pity to us and to the cast. Yeah, so my answer is it helps sometimes and sometimes it's detrimental, but actually I see it more as a force of good. The influence is better than detrimental.
Okay. And then one last thing, do you think we'll have hybrid operas where part will be done live and then they'll bring it produced, then they'll have somebody singing from, let's say, in another country? I hear that may be the case that Bayreuth's bringing the chorus in from someplace else, while and then the orchestra may be one place else. Do you see that
I suppose under these circumstances, yes, under the COVID circumstances, I did, the only show I've done the past year, over a year and a half, was A Midsummer Night's Dream in the UK at a festival. And we had to record the orchestra. So the orchestra was pre-recorded and the conductor had to conduct the singers to the orchestra. We lost the kids' chorus due to COVID. It was a nightmare, actually. I don't think, and it's just a personal opinion, I don't think any amount of filming, any amount of splicing, any amount of anything will ever replace the sound of a human voice with an orchestra in your face. Ever. And I don't want it replaced. I want to sit there feeling as if I just did my first, human Botox screamed at me because there's an enormous chorus singing the arrival of the Venetian guest in Otello. That's a moment that I don't want homogenized and altered in sound. I want that live. And I'll give you exactly the reason why. It is vibration. The essence of all music is the vibration of sound, the vibration of air. So you can get that through speakers, but you will never get that from a human body as the purest sound, because that's where the emotion comes from. So that's why I wouldn't want it to be too much of a mix of let's bring this in, bring that in. Experimentally, absolutely, of course. But as a substitution, I would say not for me. That's not my idea.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, Brad, did you have another question?
Actually, I do. It goes back to what you said at the beginning about, Paul, your first opera was Wozzeck. What was your second opera and how many years later was that?
So the first opera was Wozzeck. It was actually in 1979. And it was conducted by Sir Alexander Gibson at Scottish Opera, directed by David Olden, who gets very pissed off when I remind people that the first opera I saw was his production. And we always have a laugh because he was like, I'm not that old. Well, you are actually. And it was a wonderful Brechtian curtain production. It was superb. So enthralled was I at this. We went to one performance. I then went back to get standing room to watch the rest, the other performances. It was repeated at the end of the season in May or June, I think. And then Scottish Opera, Gibson, gave an opportunity to a young conductor to do, I think it was his first opera, and it was Simon Rattle. So I went back, there were 5 of those, and I went back to see those. The second opera was 2 years later in 1981, and it was Tristan and Isolde at English National Opera with Johanna Meyer. And it was amazing. I was utterly blown away. The third opera was The Merry Widow, and I thought, what the hell is this? What happened? What is this about? I grew up in the projects. I did not have classical. I had classical music in school. I played in the orchestra and all of that, but in my family, there was nothing to do with theatre or classical music. Quite the opposite. They actually really discouraged you from doing it because it was seen as too middle class. We were from a blue collar working class family. It was the wrong thing. You shouldn't be doing this. Too posh, let's say. When I saw Wozzeck, I'm looking at this show and there's a single unmarried mother with a kid married to a kind of a crazy person who lends himself for experiments, and she's having an affair screwing the local drum major. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is where I live. This is all about us. Oh, and what happens? He kills her at the end. Yeah, hello, this is kind of where I live. So it really spoke to me.
Fascinating. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we've got another question from Paul Dockschlager.
Oh, and Mary also has a question.
Oh, I didn't see Mary up here. Well, let's let Mary ask her question.
Excuse me, I am so glad to meet you, Mr. Curran. I'm rather a neophyte to the whole opera scene. I live out here in the sagebrush. I'm a little prairie rat out here in Nevada with the cowboys and Indians.
Lovely.
So you can see my knowledge is still at the very much of a neophyte stage. I appreciate Terry Stewart so much, what she is doing with the Wagner Society, guys. It is opening a whole new world for me, and I just express my gratitude greatly. But my question for you, Mr. Curran, I do read opera news, and I read the international reviews, and I'm rather disturbed with these European directors who use white rats in Lohengrin, and they do these strange things that are so far from the traditional image that I imagine these operas being directed and staged and everything. I even have a friend who calls most European productions as Euro trash. Mm-hmm. Now, what is your comment on this new breed of European director? And because I'm sorry, I just get kind of lost, rats and Lohengrin, excuse me.
Well, number one, so first of all, Mary, it's nothing new. It's absolutely nothing new. It's been going since after the war, mainly in the 60s. So this is nothing new. It's new for a lot of Americans because they don't see a lot of, although there's still been a lot of productions that have come here. The Olden brothers come to mind, who are very much in that strong theatrical way of doing it. Here's the thing. No director that's doing a show actually chooses the job themselves. Let me explain that. A director of a company asks me to come and do Lohengrin or whatever. The first person that you would have a question with is not the director of the show. The director of the show is showing their taste, showing their aesthetic, showing their view of how they're telling this story, right? And you can like that or not like that. It's the artistic director or the intendant of the company who is choosing that person. I would say, if there's any question, ask that person first. Why did you hire Paul Curran to do Lohengrin with rats or whatever? You talked about tradition. What does tradition mean? Tradition means literally somebody did it that way before. That's it. Tradition literally is defined by that which is done before, we're going to do it again. And it becomes a tradition. He sang a high C at the end of this, I'll sing a high C next time. Oh, it's a tradition, we'll always sing a high C. But if you go back, Mary, and you look at the history of opera, opera's always been scandalous. Opera's always had this outrageous push of boundaries. My old grandmother, who was staunchly Catholic, the idea of Tosca being in a church, kissing a man in front of a statue of the Madonna, literally the woman would have had a heart attack. A heart attack. So that's always been there. There's never been any Poppaea, the incarnation of Poppaea. The real story of Poppaea is she gets pregnant at the end and he kicks her to death down a staircase. That's kind of a lot worse than maybe rats and stuff. So what I'm saying is that opera, the scandal of opera, of how directors see these stories, is nothing new. I did a Trovatore, written in the 1850s, right? I set it in the 1850s. I didn't set it in the 12th century, 12th, 13th century when it's meant to be. A woman in Bologna came backstage, came up to me and said, "Who's the director?" I said, "Oh, me." It was at the premiere, and she slapped me across the face. I mean, bang. How dare you do this to Trovatore? And I was like, there wasn't a rat. Nobody was a sort of, leather-beclad, head-shaven, marching lesbian vampire. It was the Renaissance. I mean, we did it as the Risorgimento. And she was horrified. I think what it is what I would encourage you to do, Mary, is to have a look at why, just say to yourself, why did they do it that way? And again, you may like it or might not. Sometimes you can look at a traditional production. I saw a production of La Bohème a couple of years ago. I was horrified to the point I had to leave because I have never seen anything in 40 plus years of watching opera. I've never seen anything so intellectually lazy in my life. A directing free zone. No character looked at anybody else, no character meant to do with anybody else. The kids, Act 2 of Bohème takes place on Christmas Eve in Paris when it's supposed to be snowing, right? The kids with no jackets on were sitting on the floor. Again, in the 60s, if I'd sat on the floor in Scotland in a street, my mother would have had a conniption. But the director didn't know what to do with these people, so he sat the kids. They sat and sang, got up, walked to the back, stood there. When their next bit came up, they got up and walked forward and sat down again. So it was as intellectually lazy or obtuse to me as the rats. So that's how I would answer that, is think why they're doing it. You don't need to like, by the way, my old ballet teacher years ago said to me when I first started, I was a teenager, because I was like, oh, I'm not so sure if I like that. Mm-hmm. And he said, only an auctioneer is under obligation to admire all schools of art. And you're no auctioneer. Hope that answers it.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay. Dave Dalto's got his hand up. And how about a question from you, Dave? Dave was one of our, a founding member maybe of the society back in the day.
Close.
Yeah, close. Go ahead.
You spoke some about the relationship between the conductor and the director. Could you talk some about the relationship, the working relationship and the artistic relationship between the director and the designer?
Yeah, I mean, director and designer is fundamental. It needs to be somebody that you are in sync with, that you have a similar taste to, because the last thing you need is a clash there. When I did my graduation production from drama school, I was told, this is the designer you're working with. And we did not get on. We did not get on at all, because we saw the play, it was Chekhov's The Bear, in completely different ways. And that was a problem. So with a designer, is what you do is the director chooses the designer. The director will have a concept, an idea of, this is how I really want to tell this story. And then you talk to the designer about what you think the ideas in the piece are, maybe some visuals, whatever. Then the designer will go off, listen to the piece, read the piece, etc., and then usually come back with some ideas. What you do is, everybody has a different method. My method is I go to excess. I will go, I know it's way over budget. I know Steven Spielberg couldn't afford to do this show this way, and then I'll start editing. So it's what Hemingway said of murder your darlings, of edit to what eventually is the essence of what you really need. Have I made spectacular mistakes in design with designers when I've taken on too much work and not really been keeping my eye on the ball? Absolutely, absolutely. Othello in Wales and in Toronto, disaster, horrible. Even I hated it. But it was too late by the time we got on stage, because I will say it was my own fault. I should have seen it coming. There was also a lot of technical problems with the companies, the company, one of them. But it was a lack of vigor in my part that meant I wasn't communicating as well as I should have been with the designer. It's a very, very difficult relationship. And when you get somebody that you click with, like for me, for years with Kevin Knight and now with Gary McCann, these are designers that, because we've done so many shows together, the communication is shorter because we know each other, we know what we're going to talk about. Yeah.
Thank you.
Got a couple more hand raises here. Ann Williamson is hand raising in real time. Do you have a question, Ann? You need to unmute yourself.
Unmute. Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay. Could you please say a few sentences regarding Berlioz and Wagner changing the orchestra? That was interesting to me.
Well, quite simply, at the time, the same as a painter will start to do something abstract, or Fra Angelico back in the day, in the Middle Ages, decided that he wasn't going to paint the sky gold, as the sky had always been painted in those iconographies, but he thought he would paint it blue with gold stars, which caused him to be imprisoned and caused scandal, because you can't have the glory of God not being gold. So he painted it blue. So he was a revolutionary. Berlioz was interested in the orchestra, in the sound it was creating, the size of the sound. So he started to add more instruments, augment instruments. Wagner was very much the same in that he wanted a sound that was not just an accompaniment, but that was a serious, emotional and dramatic voice within the storytelling of the pieces. So all the way from the Flying Dutchman, you can hear that how he's orchestrating is not in a simplistic fashion. Sometimes it's very quiet, sometimes it's very, very small, but it's always this, it's like watching a movie. If you ever watch a movie and just listen to the sound, you'll hear the movie is underscored with music. I guarantee you there's almost no movie you've seen in the last 60 years that didn't have this, because that emotion carries a lot more with it. That's, I think, what both Berlioz, who was not a writer of operas, but Berlioz and Wagner were doing, is they were looking for a new human expression, a larger canvas to paint on, let's say, rather than just the traditional bum 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 bum, because Wagner was getting away from he does it a little bit in Valkyria, the aria duet idea. Does that answer the question, Anne?
Thank you. You had said that Berlioz preceded Wagner in changing the orchestra.
Well, he was around the same time, but he was doing it in France, and people were A, complaining at him, and B, learning from him.
Okay. Yes. Thank you very much.
Okay. Andy's got his hand raised. So did you want to ask a question, Andy?
Yes.
Great.
I was wondering, do you have to like a particular work before you will agree to tackle it? And along that line, have there been works for which you either gained or lost admiration the more you worked on them?
Yes. Do I have to like it? No, I don't have to like it. I have to love it. I truly have to love it. Why go on a second date with somebody that you're like, meh? No. If you're going to marry somebody, you're going to have an affair with them, you've got to be into them. So the same for me with an opera. If I don't love it, I'm not going to do it. With that in mind, are there pieces that I've gained or lost respect for? Yes, one spectacularly. I was never a great fan of Gounod's Romeo and Juliet until I directed it. And when I directed it, I loathed it with a passion. I thought it was one of the biggest pieces of crap I've ever listened to. I hated it. Structural disaster, text of a banality that is beyond belief, repetitive to the point where you thought it was written by Philip Glass. I hated it. So I started disliking it, I ended loathing it, and I will never do it again. Ever, ever, ever. No, will not do it. I have to say, now it's going to horrify a lot of you, there's another piece that, and it's not that I hate it, I think there is some glorious music, but it's such a deeply flowed piece, and it's so difficult to stage, maybe that's why, that I think there's nothing else to be done with this, and that's the Magic Flute. I find the Magic Flute is some glorious operas, but glorious numbers, but a lot of crap in between. And then that second act, like the second act of Così. What the hell do you do with the second act of Così? That's hard. There's wonderful music, the arias and duets, beautiful, but structurally a little different. So yeah, does that answer your question? But no, I need to love it. If I don't love it, I'm not going to do it. I turned down Carmen 9 times. I told you I turned down Don Giovanni 11 times. The only time I ever said yes to Don Giovanni was for the LA Philharmonic, which I was supposed to do with Dudamel. And we spent 2 years doing, it was all 3 Da Pontes, Giovanni, Così, and Figaro. And it was with big name architects, Jean Nouvel, Zaha Hadid, and Frank Gehry. And I worked on the project for 2 years and never did it because they fired me. Because Mr. Gehry got very, apparently I asked too many questions of Mr. Gehry, like, could we discuss a little more than the opening scene of Don Giovanni? In other words, could you read the rest of the damn piece? Because he didn't know it. But apparently you're not allowed to ask Frank Gehry such questions. Yeah.
You're in the house that Gehry built at the LA Phil.
Yeah.
So we have one more question, and gosh, we're in double overtime here. Paul, did you have another question, Paul Dockschlager?
Yeah, I guess a quickie and a more involved one. I saw the Golden Cockerel in Santa Fe about 4 years ago. Was that yours?
Yes.
Okay. Well, yeah, I loved it. It was a revelation. It was a revelation. I thought the second act, or that where she has her big aria, I thought that could be a nice freestanding scene. Anyway, thanks. I went down there just to see it because Rimsky-Korsakov is so rarely done in America. I mean, it's extremely. So I actually went there just to see that. Mm-hmm. I was very, very pleasantly surprised. Thanks. Now, my more detailed question is the Bernstein tempo for his recording of Tristan seems to, be controversial. Carl Bohm said that it was the only, I guess, recording that actually did the tempo the way Wagner intended. Is that true? What have you heard about that?
I don't know. I mean, the answer to that is I have no idea. But I do know one thing. Not all composers are the greatest conductors of their own works.
Oh, I see. That's true.
Shows with conductors who are the composer, and they don't always make the best choices. A prime example of that was Benjamin Britten, because not all of the Britten recordings are by far the best. And I worked with people who were assistants of Britten, Stuart Bedford, late departed Stuart Bedford, was one of those. So the whole point is when you do your piece, you're putting it up for interpretation. You're putting it out there for other people to interpret and to play with. So you may or may not like it, but it's there. And if you want it done a specific way, and Wagner, of course, is a prime example. It's when I'm teaching directing, it's something I'll say to young directors. I'll fool them. I'm a little bit bitchy with this, where we'll talk about staging something, and then I know they've read none of the stage directions. So then I'll start quiz them. I'll say, shut the book, and I'll say, what does the stage direction say here? And they're like, oh, and I say, well, why didn't you read it? And they get all defensive. Oh, well, that's how, no. In Wagner and Strauss, they write their dynamics, they write stage directions, because that's what they damn well want. He wants to he wants, yeah. They want that.
Did Wagner actually notate metronome markings for Tristan or for any of his operas?
Well, I mean, most of the stage directions you get in a score, basically up until all the Verdi, Rossini ones, etc., even the Puccini ones, they're nearly always from the stage manager or the director back in the day, that when they were rehearsing it would write things down that were added in rehearsals, and that's what got published. It's why in earlier scores, Handel, you'll never see a stage direction other than enter or exit. But as time went on, more and more went in. But certainly with Wagner, Wagner was so sick of watching shitty productions and people not doing things the way he wanted, that he would put it in exactly what he wanted. My point is, how do you interpret that? That might have been excellent for the idea of an audience in 1865, but an audience in 2021 with the advantages of cinema, television, sound recording, we see things through a very, very, very different lens. We have a lot more competition. So we cannot imagine, for example, do you think Mozart would be that happy to hear a modern orchestra playing his music as he wrote it? Because the pitch was different. The pitch is different in Vienna. The pitch would be different in the orchestra today. Or would Mozart say, hey, let's redo the Marriage of Figaro and bring me that Berlioz orchestra? We don't know. He's dead. We have no idea. But I kind of feel Mozart would have been like, get me that Wagner Berlioz orchestra, because that might be cool. That might be interesting. So the whole thing is Bernstein's tempo right or not right? None of us.
What do you think about it?
I love the Bernstein Tristan. My two favorite Tristan recordings are the Bernstein with Hildegard Behrens and a conductor I was not that much of a fan of, but I love this recording. It's the Bayreuth 52 with Mödel and Vinet and Ira Malanyuk, etc. Karajan conducting. I absolutely love it.
52?
I think it's 52, yeah.
52. Okay, great.
And one of the reasons I love it is just got such, it's Bayreuth first opening after the war. It's got such energy, such desperation. A little bit like today, we go into a theater, we see a show, we've been shut down, we've had no shows for stuff. There's a desperation to get stuff happening that I think you hear it in that recording. And also the women sound so similar that it fascinates me, because Mödel had been a mezzo before, and the darkness of her voice for that in that first act with Malanyuk is extraordinary. I love it. And I love it when Brangena doesn't disappear. I'll never understand this idea of Brangena being a minor character. Hell no.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I think I'm going to have to call that the last question. I just wanted to make a comment about the Eurotrash comment. I had some friends from Germany visiting me, and we went to something, I forget, it was a modern opera, and but it was done in a very traditional way. And they looked at intermission and said, what was that? What was that? Rosenkavalier? I mean, what was that? And immediately said, I would call that production Ameritrash. But I'm going to go to Berlin in November, and they're going to have a big symposium on 70 years of the Neue Bayreuth, and which was postponed from COVID, postponed to come forward. So I think that the traditions of the new Bayreuth were a huge influence of modernizing the whole opera genre over these years. So, and I think, sometimes it's for good, but your mileage may vary.
Well, if I can just interrupt that, Terry, the instigator of it was his grandson.
Yeah,
it was Wieland that saw it in a completely different way. And before that, Appia and his designs had seen it earlier. But it was Wieland that was the beginnings of how we see this today. A director I admire enormously, David Pountney, said a very interesting thing. And again, I use this in my teaching. He said, as directors, sometimes when we are updating something or changing something that we're given, Verdi, Wagner, whatever, sometimes we're creating a far greater monster than the one we think we're killing. And I think that's very true. So the question is simply eventually a matter of taste, I think.
Yeah, I think we had a Pountney Macbeth here that people were absolutely in a furor over. It was pretty scandalous, but there you have it. So I think I'm going to call it now because we've gone way over time in a wonderful way, in an absolutely wonderful way. I want to thank you, Paul, for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And I wish you all the best in the productions that you're going to be taking up. You're probably getting ready to jet off someplace. And no, not yet.
Next year, I've had 19 cancellations.
Oh, Lord.
19.
I'm so
in
sorry.
fact, I think I told you this earlier. Next month, I was supposed to be beginning rehearsals on Tristan and Isolde in San Francisco.
Yeah, I know.
A block away from where I live, basically.
Yeah, canceled.
I promised I'd show you a painting.
Oh,
So
yes,
having never picked up a brush, that's one of them.
It's lovely.
And this portrait, actually, people may recognize who it is. It's he was an actor. He was an Olympic swimmer and actor called Buster Crabbe. He was the first Tarzan. And this is a stylized portrait of him from a picture from 1927. But to go from, for me to go from, I can't draw a stick figure. I did that portrait the other day, and I did the other one, I think in March. And I'd only started painting in December. December was the first day I picked up a paintbrush again. So yeah, that's been my positive COVID.
Yeah. Well, we'll stay in touch. I'll swing over there and take you out to dinner.
I love it. Why not?
Since you're sequestered here in San Francisco. So thank you all for coming, everyone, today. I really appreciate you being here and welcoming Paul. And coming up in the future this year, we're going live. We will be having our Cosima party on Sunday, December 12th. Mark your calendar. We'll be at the Marines Memorial Club and Hotel. And we'll have to wait until we know the COVID protocols that will be existing in the future. We don't know that now, but they're definitely willing to bring us there in some way, shape, or form. And I already have some people who are engaged to be there as our musical interlude. And let's see, did we have another slide, Emma? Did we, here are our next two webinars. We'll have a webinar on Sunday, October 10th at 1 p.m. with Professor Gundula Kreuzer, Yale University, on her new book. And she's going to talk about flat Bayreuth, multimedial challenges in Wagner's 1876 ring production. And she'll bring the ring forward to Francesca Zambello here in San Francisco with smoke and lights and all kinds of electronic falderall, I can't think of a better word, that Wagner would have been foaming at the mouth if he could have had all of that back then. And then a live meeting in November with William Berger. And everybody knows Will Berger from Met Features and also from Metropolitan Opera Radio Broadcasting. So we're delighted to welcome him back. He's just written a new book too. So until we you again or see you in real life, I want to thank everybody for being with there, and le vol.
Le vol. Thank you very much, ladies and gents. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Paul.